Bio Kids. Today we are going to review your cells test, and then I'm going to tell you exactly what I expect from your notes that you took yesterday. So really quickly, I just want to review my e-learners. You guys did fairly well on your test. I just want to clear up a few misconceptions and some stuff that everybody got a little bit confused on. So a cell can be put into three different environments: hypertonic, hypotonic, and isotonic. These refer to the concentration of solutes in the environment or in the cell itself. So you always want to refer to, are we talking about the cell being hypertonic or the environment being hypertonic? environment. In a hypertonic environment, you are going to have your cell is here. That's your cell membrane. And we'll just have a little container that helps me visualize it, right? In a hypertonic environment, it refers to the concentration of solutes, which is like anything mixed in the water. So hypertonic means that there's not that many solutes in a cell, but outside the cell, there is a high number of solutes. So water wants to even it out, right? Water always wants to make it so there's even number or even concentration of solutes. So what's going to happen is that water is going to go out of that cell to try to dilute that environment, and then in return, that cell is going to shrink, like the eggs that were in the corn syrup. That water is going outside of the cell to try to dilute that environment. Now, in a hypotonic environment, the opposite happens. Hypo, low. So the cell, remember, you always want to say what kind of environment. The hypotonic environment. So you have your cell. You have your container. In a hypotonic, inside of your cell has a lot of concentration. Outside, not so much. This is the kind of environment that in our case study, when that doctor added distilled water to the patient's IV bag instead of saline, this is what happened. So we had this distilled water who actually had no solutes in it whatsoever. We had our red blood cells. What water did without any energy, remember, because osmosis happens naturally, the water went into, right, the cell to try to even out the concentration. What happened was the cell got bigger and bigger and eventually popped because it could never reach isotonic dynamic equilibrium because that distilled water has no solutes in it. So the water kept going in and into the cells until they eventually popped and burst. And that's why the patient died, because those red blood cells hold oxygen. Okay, you need to give me two of those answers in your in your response. For an isotonic solution, that's when life's good, right? So isotonic, you have your cell, you have your environment, and they are equally concentrated. Remember, there's still movement, but there is no net movement, that dynamic equilibrium. Water is going into and out of the cell at the same rate. So that was just a little test review that I wanted to do. I wanted to make sure we understood those three things and how hypertonic, hypotonic, and isotonic can represent the cell or the environment, depending on what you're looking at. Now, we are moving on to a pretty challenging chapter, but I think you guys are up to the challenge. So, first things first, let's look at what was expected of you from yesterday. So, your reading was Chapter 8, Section 1. So first, let's look at what we got. So we're going to be dealing with cellular energy. Your assignment was for Section 1, which was pages 218 to 221. So remember, guys, I'm not going to require Cornell notes anymore, but I'm going to. I really truly believe that this is the best method to take notes, especially in biology. Okay. So remember, before you get started with anything, you always want to look at, well, how am I going to approach this? What am I going to be reading about? So I always go through and I read the headings and the essential questions, new vocabulary, and I look at the pictures. So I know this section is going to be about how organisms obtain energy. There's going to be something called a transfer of energy. There's some words, autotrophs, heterotrophs, metabolism, a couple more words, ATP, that's going to be a thing. Oh, and then I'm already done with section 1. All right, guys. So remember, we're old pros at this now. Let's go through and let's see what we got. So the main idea, I'm right here on page 218. All living organisms use energy to carry out all biological processes. Real world reading link. New York City is sometimes called the city that never sleeps, much like the nonstop movement of a big city. Living cells are sites of constant activity. All right, so from that, I thought, well, I don't really need to add that cells are like a big city, but I do think it's important to set up my Cornell notes. So I wrote my lines. I wrote that it's chapter 8, cellular energy, section 1. You can write the date here as well. I'm titled this How Organisms Obtain Energy, because that's my big heading up here. And then right at the top, remember, you can go back and you want to put your main ideas and questions here. So that's where I chose that main idea to put it up here. All organisms use energy to carry out biological processes. I saw that the next big heading was called the transfer of energy, so I put that right there. Let's read about the transfer of energy. Many chemical reactions and processes in your cell are ongoing, even when you might not think you are using any energy. Macromolecules are assembled and broken down. Substances are transported across cell membranes, and genetic instructions are transmitted. All of these cellular activities require energy, which is the ability to do work. Figure 1 shows some of the major advancements in the study of cellular energy. Thermodynamics is the study of flow and transformation of energy in the universe. And then I saw that there was going to be laws of thermodynamics. So, how did I pull out necessary information? Well, 1, I just simply summed it up by saying cellular activities are always ongoing. All of them require energy, which is the ability to do work. I highlighted it because I wanted to remind myself that it was a vocab word. Then I wrote thermodynamics, the study of the flow of transformation and energy in the universe. I knew then I was going to be talking about the laws of thermodynamics. The first law of thermodynamics is that the law of conservation of energy, which states that energy can be converted from one form to another, but it cannot be created nor destroyed. For example, the stored energy in food is converted to chemical energy when you eat and into mechanical energy when you run or kick a ball. The second law of thermodynamics states that energy cannot be converted without the loss of usable energy. The energy that is lost is generally a measure of disorder or unusable energy in a system. Therefore, the second law of thermodynamics can also be stated as entropy increases. One example of the second law of thermodynamics is evident in food chains. Recall that in a food chain, the amount of usable energy that is available to the next trophic level decreases. So how did I sum that up? Well, I went through and I said my heading is the law of thermodynamics. There's a first one and a second one. Boom, break it down easy that way. First one, it's also known as the law of the conservation of energy. Energy can be converted from one form to another, but it cannot be created or destroyed. So I summed up that whole little blurb in not even a full sentence. Second law, and also known entropy increases. I reminded myself what entropy was. Entropy is a measure of disorder or unusable energy. It cannot be converted without the loss of usable energy. Summed it up that way. So I'm already 2 pages in, and I'm already about 3/4 of the way down my 1 cell notes. Remember, afterwards, you want to go through and you want to pull out potential test questions. I used the essential questions. So up here I wrote, what are the 2 laws of thermodynamics? I know I should be able to answer both of these questions by this set of notes. All right, moving on. Autotrophs and heterotrophs. All organisms need energy to live. Directly or indirectly, nearly all the energy for life comes from the sun. Some organisms make their own food, while others must obtain food from other organisms. Autotrophs are organisms that make their own food. Some autotrophs are called chemoautotrophs. They use inorganic substances such as hydrogen sulfide as a source of energy. Other autotrophs, such as the plant in figure 2, convert light energy from the sun into chemical energy. Autotrophs that convert energy from the sun are called photoautotrophs. Heterotrophs, such as the aphid and the ladybug in Figure 2, are organisms that need to ingest food to obtain energy. There's a couple ways you could have gone about that. You could have drawn your little diagram if you're a pictorial learner that way. I wrote it out. So I have another heading, autotrophs and heterotrophs. I wrote, nearly all the energy for life comes from the sun. I thought that was pretty important and also a really cool fact. Autotrophs make their own food using inorganic substances or the sun, and I said that is either chemoautotrophs or photoautotrophs, inorganic substances or the sun. Heterotrophs are organisms that ingest food to obtain energy. And that question mark, I don't know why that question mark's there, but that question mark shouldn't be there. So we're just going to get rid of that. Remember, at the bottom of each one of your notes, you want to sum up. So how did I sum this up? I said the laws of thermodynamics control the flow and transformation of energy in organisms. Some organisms produce their own food, and others obtain energy from food that they ingest. Make sense so far? Hope so, because we're moving on. All right. Metabolism. Hopefully, you should be thinking about times that you've heard this word before and what it means to you. But let's read. All of the chemical reactions in a cell are referred to as the cell's metabolism, a series of chemical reactions in which the product of one reaction is the substrate for the next reaction. So it's like a chain that keeps going. A series of chemical reactions in which the product of one reaction is the substrate for the next reaction is called a metabolic pathway. Metabolic pathways include two broad types, catabolic pathways and anabolic pathways. Catabolic pathways release energy by breaking down larger molecules into smaller molecules. Anabolic pathways use the energy released by catabolic pathways to build larger molecules from smaller molecules. The relationship of anabolic and catabolic pathways result in the continual flow of energy within an organism. All right, that was a lot to say. Let's see how we were able to break that down. So I went up to my next page, set up my page again. I saw vocab word, metabolism. I defined it as all of the chemical reactions that are occurring in a cell. But I just said all the chemical reactions, RXN, remember, make your life easy, in a cell. Metabolic pathways are known as a series of reactions in which the product of one reaction is the substrate for the next reaction. There are two types. Then I just split it that way because remember, diagrams are your friends in your notes. I said catabolic releases energy. I wanted to know what the energy is, at an input or an output, and what happens. So catabolic releases energy, breaking down large molecules into small molecules. And anabolic pathways uses energy from catabolic pathways to build large molecules from small molecules. So catabolic releases energy, large to small. Anabolic uses that energy, large to big. Energy continually flows through metabolic reactions in an organism in an ecosystem. Photosynthesis is the anabolic pathway in which light energy from the sun is converted to chemical energy for use by the cell. In this reaction, autotrophs use light energy, carbon dioxide, and water to form glucose and oxygen. The energy stored in the glucose produced by photosynthesis can be transferred to other organisms when the molecules are consumed as food. Cellular respiration is the catabolic pathway in which organic molecules are broken down to release energy for use by a cell. In cellular respiration, oxygen is used to break down organic molecules, resulting in the production of carbon dioxide and water. Notice the cyclical nature of these processes, where the products of one reaction are the reactions from the other reaction. So I really like this diagram here, so I wanted to make sure we included that in our notes. So what I did is I added some color because we like color in our notes. And I have my input, sunlight, photosynthesis. Photosynthesis produces O2 and glucose. Cellular respiration uses that O2 and glucose and it releases CO2 and H2O, which then CO2 and H2O are put together to form photosynthesis. And then down here, I defined each one of those terms. Cellular respiration is a catabolic pathway. That's kind of why I lined it up over here with how I defined catabolic. A catabolic pathway in which organic molecules are broken down to release energy for use by the cell. Photosynthesis is an anabolic pathway. Right up here, I defined anabolic, in which light energy is converted into chemical energy for use by the cell. So that was all I could fit on this page. But what did I pull out for my column and for my summary? Well, I really liked, there's a blurb in your book that says the relationship of anabolic and catabolic pathways results in the continuous flow of energy within an organism. I think that's a really good point. I also wanted to make sure I knew the difference between an anabolic and a catabolic pathway. And I summed it up by saying cells store and release energy through coupled anabolic and catabolic reactions. We're almost there, guys. Now we're going to get into some of the technical stuff, which is exciting. All right, let's see what we got. ATP is the unit of cellular energy. So I started my notes by saying ATP, the unit of cellular energy. Energy exists in many forms, including light energy, mechanical energy, thermal energy, and chemical energy. I decided none of that was important enough to put in my notes. It was just very wordy. So remember, as you're reading, try to think about what's important and what's not important. That was a lot of words that didn't really say anything. So, in living organisms, chemical energy is stored in biological molecules and can be converted to other forms of energy when needed. For example, the chemical energy in biological molecules is converted to mechanical energy when muscles contract. Adenosine triphosphate, also known as ATP, is the most important biological molecule that provides chemical energy. Then I have two subheadings. There's ATP structure and ATP function. ATP is a multi-purpose storehouse of chemical energy that can be used by cells in a variety of reactions. Although one carrier molecule transports energy within the cell, ATP is the most abundant energy carrier molecule in cells and is found in all types of organisms. As shown in Figure 4, ATP is a nucleotide made up of an adenine base, a ribose sugar, and 3 phosphate groups. Now, I know that structure is related to function, so before I took my notes down on this whole part, I wanted to read this whole couple paragraphs so I could see how best to put it in my notes. ATP releases energy when the bond between the second and third phosphate group is broken, forming a molecule called adenosine diphosphate. Remember, these headings will help you. Triphosphate, what do we think? 3 phosphates. Diphosphate, 2. Tri, 3, di, 2. Mono, 1, right? You know your root words. This will help you. All right, so adenosine diphosphate, ADP, and a free phosphate group, as shown in Figure 4. Energy is stored in the phosphate bond is formed when ADP receives a phosphate group and becomes ATP, as shown in Figure 4. ATP and ADP can be interchanged by the addition or removal of that one phosphate group. Sometimes ADP becomes adenosine monophosphate by losing an additional phosphate group. There's less energy in this reaction, so most of the reactions in the cell involve ATP and ADP. So from there, I summed it up by saying in organisms, the chemical energy is stored in biological molecules, can be converted into other forms of energy when needed. I highlighted my adenosine triphosphate, also known as ATP. It's the most important biomolecule that provides chemical energy. The structure is a nucleotide made up of an adenine base, a ribose sugar, and 3 phosphates. The function of this is that it releases energy when the bond between the second and third phosphate group is broken, forming ADP and a free phosphate group. And then I wrote this diagram because I wanted to remind myself that this is how it works. We have ATP, we have our base, and then we have our 3 phosphates. You add water to that, that is what releases that energy. So when that H2O pops that phosphate group off, when that happens, we have energy, which we like. We like energy. And then we have that free phosphate group, the ADP, the diphosphate, which does not have as much chemical energy stored. And then if we use that energy to pop that phosphate group back on, we're back up to ATP and have that potential energy to be stored. Okay, so make sure this whole thing makes sense to you. And then I summed this up by saying the energy released from the breakdown of ATP drives cellular activities. So there you have it, guys. That is what I expected out of your notes. Remember, your notes, they don't have to be super wordy, but they do have to have enough details in them. But they need to be organized in a way that they can be helpful to you. Remember, even though your tests are open notes and all of this is open notes, it's really important that you take the time to make sure you understand this information and that you can apply it to questions or to real life thought processes. Okay? So that's all I have for you today. Have a good day.